All right, so the intent here is for this to be very much of an interactive and sort of very active, engaged type of a two-way conversation that we want to get to about something that is critically important to the future of ocean science, ocean technology, and therefore us and our children and the ones that come after them as well. Seems like, so back, everybody remember what happened back in about 2014? We had a thing called sequestration in the U.S., and at that point, I came into work one day at the Pentagon, and I found out that an officer who was a Navy pilot, she had been going through the budget to try to cut the Navy's budget basically in half as part of an exercise, and she had zeroed out all of the Navy's oceanographic ships, the oceanographic survey ships. And so therein began a process of me and my staff going in and having to explain the importance of oceanographic survey ships, somewhat similar to ocean research ships. But the good thing was that she and her bosses actually listened. And it's led me to, and then at the end of the day, we ended up, by the end of the time that we, it was all over, we went actually from 4 ships that were planned to 6 oceanographic survey ships that the Navy has today. So this led me to understand that there are basically 3 types of people when it comes to oceanographic ships. There are those who understand the importance of the ships, like most of the people in this room. There are those who don't understand necessarily, like this young lady, but we're willing to learn. Then unfortunately, there are those who don't understand and don't want to know, which I refer to those as hazards to safe navigation, and they are best handled through dredging operations or things. But I've tried that, and that didn't work very well. So I tend to take the tact, and I took this of trying to really educate people to the importance of the oceanographic ships and our federal oceanographic ships. And that leads us to where we are today with this talk and this panel. Ships are infrastructure, as talked about with the IWG-FI. Infrastructure and ships are expensive. There is a desire in a lot of science areas to reduce the amount of infrastructure. People are looking at ways to save money, to be able to put more money in the hands of researchers, which is rightfully important. So the actual reduction. But we have to understand that the ships that we have and other parts of the infrastructure are the platform by which we do the important ocean research that Admiral McAllister talked about his priorities, having to do with things like safe navigation, environmental prediction, looking at what's going on in the world. And so when we think about hurricanes and typhoons and their impact on coastal resiliency and being able to actually predict hurricanes more and more days down in advance with a shrinking error radius in terms of where it's going to go and even the intensity of the storms, and make decisions to evacuate or make the actual decisions up front to build up our infrastructure. The Arctic change that has been talked about, forecasting the environmental conditions, these all rely on understanding the ocean, and we have to realize that to understand the ocean, we have to have access to information about the ocean. Ships give us access. That access is critical. You look around the technology here, from sail drones to autonomous vehicles to all kinds of new satellite algorithms, everything, ways to sense and understand the ocean, but you can't get there if you don't have the access that really we still rely on ships. My belief is, to know the sea, we must go to sea. We must go to sea on the ships, and the federal oceanographic fleet makes up a big part of that. So we all need to appreciate the importance of the ships. I am concerned, as are a lot, that the future plans for the rebuilding and the recapitalization of our federal oceanographic ships is not well thought out, not necessarily coherent, I would argue. And even though there are some great plans out there, NOAA especially has a great plan for its fleet oceanographic ship capitalization, but then at some point you've got to get to the budget people I talked about. And remember that a plan without resources is what is referred to as a fantasy. So at some point, the onus is going to come on to all of us in this room to be able to explain that importance going forward, and also to use that to spread across industry and our international partners. All right, so you've heard enough from me, because that's pretty much all that I'm going to say, because I've got a lot of experts up here who are going to really talk about the importance of oceanographic ships. And based on that, hopefully we can get into the details of dialogue so that everybody can walk out of here with the ability to have a meaningful conversation, whether it's public, whether it's a budgeteer, whether it's a policy, a congressman or woman, whoever it may be, about the importance of the oceanographic fleet going forward. The importance to our economy, to our culture, to the science that was talked about, to our national security, and we're going to hear about Task Force Ocean and the Navy. These are all pieces of that we all need to understand that importance. Everyone who's here at MTS, not just in this room, needs to understand that, because without our federal oceanographic fleet, all this technology actually won't really come to bear in the ways that it needs to in the future. So, I'm going to introduce each one of these individuals as we go through, and they're each going to give a few minutes of background of what, where their priorities are, what they see about the federal oceanographic, about their ships, about what ships mean to them going forward. And then I may have a few questions based on what they say, and then we'll open it up for a lot of counterattacks from the audience. So first of all, we have Jim Kendall, who's the regional director of BOEM Alaska, Outer Continental Shelf region. Jim's been at BOEM for a long time ago. He's worked in the Gulf of Mexico and also in headquarters in D.C. Been at really the forefront of BOEM's proven ability to use science basis for information to make decisions with. And so he understands certainly the value. He's a graduate of Old Dominion University and has his PhD from Texas A&M as well. And he's been also very much involved in the MTS event here and running around in circles, getting a lot of great things done. So, Jim, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, John. First of all, is everyone having a good time? And now, as John alluded to, I have one of two technical program chairs for the conference. My other co-chair is Carol Jansen. She is fantastic. She's at the Alaska Ocean Observing System. If you really like the technical program, let me know. I will tell Carol, okay? If you don't like it, come to me and I will find out which of my colleagues is not here and we can blame them together. So Donna, you're here, Kevin's here, and a few others. So you get a pass. Okay, now in giving these comments, some of you know me. I have a tendency to ramble a bit and get off on other tangents. So I've got prepared comments here because I am exhausted and I want to focus this. So that's what we're going to do. First of all, BOEM. BOEM is a bureau within the Department of Interior responsible for managing the development of the energy and mineral resources of the outer continental shelf. Very simply, if you go to the beach, in the U.S., the state, you swim out usually 3 miles. That's state waters. From there to the end of the EEZ, that's the continental shelf, federal waters. For the entire country, it's 1.6 billion acres. Okay, 1.6 billion acres. Alaska has 1 billion of that. So I get the biggest chunk of the OCS compared to all my other colleagues. And importantly, that is where the U.S. Arctic is. If you look up at the Chukchi and Beaufort Sea, you could include the other parts of it just north of the Gulf of Alaska, depending on how you define the Arctic. But if you go above the Arctic Circle, you've got an area up there that's absolutely huge, and that falls within my jurisdiction. As a result of that, that makes our nation an Arctic nation. Just go to Tennessee, Kentucky, Wyoming. Is the United States an Arctic nation? A lot of them will say, what? It's an Arctic nation. Now, so where do I go from here? Digging down a little deeper, beyond BOEM's mission, our core values include stewardship of energy and mineral resources, integrity and ethics. BOEM is committed to conducting responsible resource management. I do not work for an oil company. I do not work for an NGO. I do not work for an individual state. I work for everybody. On a good day, everybody likes me. On the second best day, everybody hates me equally. That means I'm doing my job. And the third core value is science-informed decision. BOEM is committed to using the best available science to fill critical gaps in the information needed to inform the wide range of decisions within the Bureau. BOEM facilitates world-class research by talented scientists in many disciplines. To be very blunt and to use numbers, and this was alluded to this morning by Vincent DeVito, over the past 40 years, BOEM and its predecessor agencies has invested $1.1 billion in research on the outer continental shelf on behalf of the nation. In Alaska alone, we have invested $500 million. Many of the researchers at this conference and some of the products you see in the exhibit hall are intimately involved in the work that we do. Yes, we are within the Department of Interior, and we have an ocean role. There's an O in DOI, there's an O in BOEM, and there's an O in our colleagues at NOAA. So we're all one family. So that is who BOEM is and what we do, or more importantly, what we are responsible for. So why am I here besides being railroaded by a number of my esteemed colleagues who are responsible for this panel, and you know who you are, I remember. Although there has been an increase in the use of satellites, gliders, and other advanced technologies for ocean research and observations, ships continue to be a critical component of BOEM research. For example, while unmanned systems have proven to be invaluable in our work, they do have their limitation in terms of the collection of samples and the support for long-term time series data. Research vessels and shipboard instrumentation and sampling will continue to be critical for supporting BOEM's mission for the years to come. While BOEM activities in the frontier areas such as the Arctic have taken advantage of these new technologies and have more and more frequently incorporated them into their use, we do not anticipate a reduction in the need for ships. New technologies are adding to and expanding our capabilities. They are not replacements. Even the autonomous operations of AUVs and other untethered instrument packages still need to be launched and recovered. Further, autonomous operations as a whole typically also include a suite of other activities, such as mapping and water quality sampling. So when a ship is out there deploying an autonomous underwater vehicle, that ship is doing other things. It's mapping, it's collecting samples, it's sending other instrument packages down there to collect video on the bottom. There's a lot of things going on. Expanding our information base of the OCS, particularly in frontier areas such as the U.S. Arctic, is an indispensable requirement for informing decisions and ensuring our compliance with the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Act, all of the laws we are responsible for following. We follow those laws, we need the science to do that, and we need the tools. As the existing fleet continues to age, there is renewed urgency each day to maintain current capabilities while at the same time incorporating ever-advancing technologies. Of particular note here, in terms of the U.S. Arctic, the reduction of sea ice and extended open water season has implications for accelerated long-term economic development of the Arctic marine region. Sectors potentially, if not already, showing higher levels of activity, and I think Admiral McAllister touched on that, include shipping, tourism, commercial fishing, defense, and for BOEM, the development of energy and mineral resources. While longer field seasons and less ice at first glance increase sampling opportunities, they may also increase the potential for more severe storms and increased waves, stressing both tried and true marine operations and new technologies, not to mention an increase for the need of search and rescue. If you got more people up there because of the open water season, the weather turns bad, you need increased capabilities of search and rescue, and I think the Admiral handled that very well a little earlier on. These conditions also call for further discussions regarding an appropriate integration of such technologies as telepresence, with scientists participating both on research vessels and on shore. The integration of both new and tried and true standard technologies are absolutely a must in the frontier area. In the Arctic, I have heard it said, on a very bad day, you can be more interested in staying alive than actually conducting your mission. So it's a very challenging environment. You need the right ships at the right time with the right people and the right equipment. Expanded periods of darkness, increased cloud cover, seasonal and broken ice cover, and ionospheric interferences can further be impediments. Finally, a key for continual scientific knowledge and advances in ocean technologies requires a facilitated collaborative approach. The federal research fleet is particularly crucial for activities in the Arctic where alternative vessels are extremely limited. Building capacity among federal partners and sharing vessel resources and facilities can assist in accomplishing our mutual goals, while the newest advances in technologies expand but do not replace our current capabilities.
All right. I can think of a lot of things to ask you, but we'll wait. So next, I'm going to turn it over for some very brief remarks by Captain Todd Bridgman. You heard from a little bit earlier. He's the Director of Marine Operations for NOAA, so all of the shipboard marine operations, including the Okeanos Explorer. He has basically grown up in NOAA on board her ships, been to sea on numerous ships, in all the actual positions, I think, from ensign to captain. And there's probably no one better in the NOAA Corps in uniform that knows NOAA's ships than Todd Bridgman. So it's an honor to have him here. He is also a graduate of Texas A&M Galveston's Marine Merchant and Marine Science program down there. And I hear he even had to stop by Oregon State University, and apparently he stuck around the Oregon coast.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us late in the day here. Brad got an intelligence report earlier that we're battling the wine and cheese social downstairs, so thank you for being in the room. Nobody should leave on that news either. I hope that you stay here.
Very good.
Thank you, Todd Bridgman, Director of Marine Operations for NOAA. So NOAA takes the pulse of the planet each day from the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean so we can supply data that's timely, accurate, and actionable and get it in the hands of the people who need it most. The products and services that NOAA provides, folks rely on each and every day. We collect the data through numerous observational systems. One of the most impactful of these is our fleet of 16 large oceanographic survey ships. We have, as I said, 16 ships, about 600 personnel, supporting, operating, and maintaining those ships. They'll focus mainly on U.S. EEZ, U.S. Trust, but the ships go where the science is, so we have ships from the Indian Ocean to the Chesapeake Bay and all points in between. The ships collect the fundamental data, again, to provide a host of products and services that inform $4.6 trillion of economic activity tied to maritime interest and port activity, including $200 billion fisheries industry and millions of primary and downstream jobs from there. Our ships work hard each and every day. They conduct over 100 missions each year and thousands of sea days, up around 2,800 sea days a year, all in pursuit of the data that we need. You know, for me, and again resonates with Admiral McAllister's comments that he made earlier in his keynote. He talked about risk and uncertainty, and so risk generated by uncertainty and lack of domain awareness. So we are in the uncertainty elimination business, and increasing maritime domain awareness. That is our focus and our job. The information that our ships collect, you know, I tell my folks a lot, it's data, right? So from data you make information, from information you make smart and strategic and intelligent decisions that inform the lives and livelihoods of each and every American each and every day. So it all begins with the data. Without the data, things will just fall apart and become a guess and become uncertain. And all these issues that we've talked about, safe navigation, health of fishery stocks, ocean acidification, climate change, fisheries, migration, moving, chasing colder waters, all these decisions are too important to leave up to a guess. So it all begins with that fundamental data that we'll need each and every day there. So, yeah, that's all I have.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. All right, I think they can switch to the other mic down there next. Again, really great to have your background and expertise here and your understanding and importance of data to get to the right decision. So we've gone from Interior to Commerce and now over back to Homeland Security and the Coast Guard. So Dave Porcucci is the Marine Science Coordinator for the U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Healy. As you know, does a lot of scientific research work in the Arctic and around Antarctica in the Arctic seas down there. So he has a lot of experience, certainly, in that. He's been doing that for about 17 years now, I think. So again, a great breadth of knowledge there. And he has a lot of also experience doing field research, both with NOAA in the field, from the state of Florida, and also in California for the, I think under the National Park Service in years gone by. He is, like a few others around here, a distinctive graduate of the Florida Institute of Technology. So it's great to have Dave up here. And he also has a master's degree from the University of South Florida as he crossed coast to finish his education in the state of Florida. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon. I'm with the Coast Guard. Just to clarify, I'm a civilian in the Coast Guard, so my station doesn't change. I've been with Healy, as John mentioned, for 17 years. I'm going to talk a little more about what Admiral McAllister touched on, and that is the U.S. Coast Guard icebreakers, and in particular Healy. The Coast Guard maintains a statutory mission to support ocean-going research, and that's in the U.S. Code under Title 14. We've done so for decades and continue to do so. Coast Guard is the designated provider of icebreaker services for the federal government. A significant portion of oceanographic science in icebound regions is supported by Coast Guard icebreakers. Of our two heavy polar icebreakers, Polar Star is expected to remain in service until 2026. And you may have heard the Polar Sea has been deactivated for almost 7 years now. Coast Guard has also periodically employed buoy tenders to support marine research on a ship of opportunity basis. The Coast Guard operates the icebreaker Healy in the Arctic Ocean and continues to support ocean-going research every summer. Healy is a fully capable scientific research vessel with advanced oceanographic capabilities. Federal agencies including NSF, Navy, NOAA, NASA, USGS, BOEM have chartered Healy for research cruises in the Arctic. The reimbursable rate on the actual fuel consumption plus a prorated operational cost is paid by the user. NSF also supports Healy through embarked scientific technician support. The total estimated day rate for Healy in 2018 is going to be around $31,000. As the vessel operator, the Coast Guard spends millions of dollars each year above and beyond the recouped costs to maintain and enhance Healy as the world's premier high-latitude research vessel. Healy also has supported the Department of State efforts to map and document the extended continental shelf claim in the Arctic. Consistent with its treatment of portions of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea as customary international law. Healy is also the only research vessel, U.S. or otherwise, working in the West Arctic on an annual basis, and has been doing this for close to 17 years. She has collected one-of-a-kind long-term oceanographic data from surface observations, water column profiles, and long-term monitoring using deep ocean moorings. To maintain U.S. polar icebreaking capability, the Coast Guard is actively recapitalizing polar icebreakers through the acquisition of 3 heavy polar icebreakers and 3 medium polar icebreakers. The recapitalization of the Coast Guard polar icebreaker fleet will provide the nation with capability for year-round assured access to both polar regions. The assets will include multi-beam sonar and oceanographic winch and A-frame and other standard oceanographic systems. All will include modular spaces, and berthing to support the ocean-going research. These new icebreakers will directly support the Coast Guard's statutory mission in the polar regions, including search and rescue, marine environmental protection, maritime security, environmental stewardship, and, of course, oceanographic research. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. So next in line of our governmental representatives representing the Department of Defense, we have Miss Emily Chandler. She's a graduate of the University of Maine with a master's degree in Earth and Climate Science. She is a Canal Sea Grant Fellow with the best appointment in the Canal Sea Grant Fellow program on the oceanographer of the Navy staff, which is a credit to the Canal Sea Grant program, because I can tell you the young men and women who've worked on that staff, I know firsthand, have done some amazing work, and Emily is no different. She is the international and interagency policy liaison on that staff and gets involved in a lot of extremely sensitive and very senior issues. And just as importantly, she just got off. She just debarked the U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Healy, showing you another example of the great Navy-Coast Guard relationship, sending her to sea thanks to the Coast Guard. So Emily's going to tell us a little bit about national security and the Navy's Task Force Ocean, which is very important to what's going on with the Federal Oceanographic Fleet as well.
Thank you very much, Admiral White, and to the organizers of the panel for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. It is nice to be back on dry land. As Admiral White said, I was just on board Healy for 3 weeks, which was a really relevant and pertinent experience, and definitely a highlight of my time so far. And I'll be discussing with the Navy the fact that I went to sea on a Coast Guard vessel. In my office, we like to say that about, and people in this room are familiar with these statistics, about 5% of the ocean has been explored. Maybe 20% has been mapped, and all of it is changing at a really rapid rate. And it is in large part the U.S. Federal Oceanographic Fleet that studies that ocean and helps us better understand it so that we can model and predict what is happening in the world's oceans. And from the Navy's perspective, the cutting-edge science underpins the safety and our ability to operate safely in that marine environment. And so the Navy survey ships are always conducting research and collecting data to improve our ability to model, forecast, and predict what is happening, and improving our ability to exploit the undersea domain. Now, since, relatively speaking, the Cold War period, we have enjoyed very strong ocean science in the United States, but over time, that advantage has been put at risk of eroding. And that is something that has gotten a lot of attention this year in DC, and the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, tasked the Chief of Naval Research and the Oceanographer of the Navy with standing up a task force to change and fix the situation. And that task force, as you have heard, is called Task Force Ocean, charged with reinvigorating the state of Navy-relevant U.S. ocean sciences. It is a federal task force that pulls in members of all of the major agencies in DC. Everybody sitting at the table, their organizations are in some way included, and also reaches beyond to solicit input from academia as well as industry. And the focus of Task Force Ocean is divided into several lines of effort. The first and foremost, that's our ability to sense and observe the marine environment. So we are thinking about vessels, research vessels, survey ships, as well as unmanned systems in that category. We're also looking at our ability to model and predict the marine environment, and finally, our ability to take what we've learned and translate it into useful and relevant decision aids. And once we have done all of this, we need to ensure that we have the personnel necessary to man ships, unmanned systems, and these model and predictive capabilities. So we're looking at how to recruit, develop, and retain a technical workforce in this environment as well. So each of these lines of effort has a dedicated working group that has met this summer to explore how we will move forward in each of those arenas, and they are working together to develop a long-range roadmap for a way ahead. to ensure the state of U.S. oceanography remains competitive and ahead of our competitors. Some of the early ideas that have come out of those workshops are that we want to overall increase permeability between the Navy and the federal government, as well as academia and industry, so that our partners have a better sense of what our needs are and then can help us address and solve the challenges that we are facing. We want to get scientists to sea on Navy vessels. When people in my office say we want to take scientists to sea, I've been a scientist who's gone to sea, but I'm not a scientist who's gone to sea on a Navy vessel, and that's what we need to do. We need to get scientists at sea to see what issues the Navy is facing. We also need to get instruments and new technologies to see and test them to see if they are useful tools. And ultimately, we need to increase that permeability so that we can leverage the full range of technology and science that is already available to us in this day and age. So as we continue to explore, map, and chart the world's oceans, and we're going to continue to use unmanned systems, and their role is going to expand, we do need to make sure that our fleets are collecting the best data that we need and helping us maintain that advantage in the undersea domain. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Emily. All right, and our anchor person is Brad Moran, the Dean of the College of Fisheries and Ocean Science at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who also operates the other icebreaker in the Federal Oceanographic Fleet, the research vessel Sekuliak. And so Brad is has a great background to be up on this panel because he is now working in Alaska, dealing with Arctic, but with a lot of ocean science at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Part of that, he was in Washington, D.C., working for the White House, running the National Ocean Council for a while, and also as the head of oceans programs at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. Before that, he was in the National Science Foundation. Part of that, he was up in Rhode Island, working at the University of Rhode Island as a professor and assistant head of research there. And part of that, he was at Woods Hole finishing his postdoc, got his PhD at Dalhousie, and his bachelor's degree at Concordia. So you can see Brad is sort of doing a great circle around Admiral, right around the Arctic almost, around the pole. So he just needs to spend some time in Siberia, then maybe Norway, and he can actually complete his tour. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Brad, and give us the academic versus the government, and thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. I thought you were just going to say Brad is great and just leave it at that.
I didn't use that term.
Anyway, I appreciate that. I spent time in Siberia. Thank you, John, for that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And in light of the refreshments downstairs, that's a challenge, I understand. And thank you, Admiral McAllister, for your keynote, which was excellent, I thought, and really on point. I want to give an academic perspective. We do operate Sekuliak. I apologize for not having an image of it, but it is on the flyer, and I thought the flyer might be posted. And nonetheless, the College of Fisheries and Ocean Science that I'm the dean of at University of Alaska Fairbanks is part of what we call the nation's Arctic University. It's really a collection of 3 universities based at Fairbanks, right here in Anchorage and down in southeastern Juneau. And our college is heavily engaged in research in the Arctic, in the oceans, the coast, and also in inland waters, particularly fisheries and oceans. Second point I want to make is, as John noted, our college and our university is charged with the operation of research vessel Sekuliak. We take that very seriously. We're very proud operators. Of course, Alaska defines the U.S. as an Arctic nation, and we sort of define the UNOLS community as the Arctic vessel operator up here in Alaska. The challenge then for our college is to deliver quality operation and ensure compliance, particularly with Alaska Native communities. It was alluded to by Admiral McAllister. We worked very hard at that aspect, and there's some lessons learned there for the academic fleet generally, even outside of Alaskan waters, polar waters. So really the challenge then, and that was really the charge, as I understood it, the challenge and the opportunity for our college is to ensure top quality science operation. It's a privilege to operate the vessel, by the way, owned by National Science Foundation, to ensure compliance not only with the environment but with cultural communities, and I'm happy to address that further, and of course to have operational excellence overall. And so we are succeeding in that. And how are we doing that? What are some of the lessons learned for this audience and beyond? Again, in the context of an academic operator, some of the ways that we're working to ensure that is have a top quality crew. Like other UNOLS vessels, we have a top quality crew and captain. We have great shoreside facilities down in Seward, our home port. And we ensure a very strong communication, I would say weekly, with the National Science Foundation. And we're glad to have Bob Houtman here from the National Science Foundation. Second, we establish strong communities with the science community. We have, of course, a website, but we have a great reach because of our researchers in our college with many of the interested parties that utilize the vessel. And that's a key, I think, to expanding the fleet going forward, is to have an operator that is actually in conducting research and education and outreach. And third, as I had alluded to, is that we're establishing strong communications and, most importantly, trust with the many Alaska indigenous communities, subsistence hunters, and organizations such as the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission. We routinely attend their meetings. We are on a first-name basis. Our research associate dean is on their board, and so we ensure that. So we're succeeding in those ways. I just wanted to wrap up. I'm not going to go on like Jim, as long as Jim did, but I would say that we had a gentleman's agreement, Dave and I, about day rates on Healy. So I called BS on the differential in day rate between Sikuliak, which is just north of $50,000 a day, the real reflected rate, and Dave knows that Healy really does operate at around, I think we just said, $140,000 a day. So I think that there's a challenge out there for the feds, for the Coast Guard, for NSF, for ONR, for OSDP, quite frankly, that doesn't exist right now, to sort this out, because it's fully understandable that you're going to go with a less expensive vessel, but we have a brand new $200 million only ice-capable UNOLS vessel in Sikuliak that we do not want to lose crews that are tied up at the dock, because it's our tax dollars at work. So that needs to get sorted out. But Dave, I wasn't going to go there until you threw that out there. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Brad. And Emily, I'm glad that we've got the Navy sitting in between the National Science Foundation and the Coast Guard. We know you're all powerful, can solve any conflict problems like that. So I have a whole bunch of canned questions, and they're really great questions, but they're not nearly as good as some of the ones that you have. So I'm gonna put my questions on the shelf right here, because I really want to open this up to you guys to ask hard questions about what you've heard, some more insight, or any other thing that you wanted to come here and hopefully hear some comments on. When you ask your question, please speak loudly, loud enough for me to hear. I will repeat the question. If you don't speak loud enough for me to hear, I'll just make it up like I thought I heard it. So please, who in the audience? Anybody got a question? Admiral.
All right, I'll break the ice. No pun intended.
With a bunch of icebreakers.
I'll direct my question to Dr. Moran, but Dr. Kendall can probably contribute as well. So you referred to relationships with Alaska Native communities. Can you characterize some of the concerns that are repeated over time that researchers, that maritime operators really need to pay attention to ensure that the varied uses of our Arctic waters are deconflicted?
Well, thank you for the question, sir. The key challenge is, as some at that whaling commission will point out, that if they don't get, they being the subsistence hunters, their whale, their people are not going to eat. So it's a very serious matter. And they're very, very understanding and knowledgeable of acoustics, noise of ships. We're not able to tell them what the noise profile is of Sikuliak, for example, or quite frankly, Healy in varying water conditions. So it's a very engaging process to work with those communities. How we do it is try to gain trust, attend their meetings. Scientists present their work a year in advance. We have now established the only community, it's a bit of a word, Community and Environmental Compliance Standard Operating Procedure, CSOP document. It's on our website. And in fact, that document has just now been accepted for publication as a peer-reviewed article in Marine Policy. I'm happy to share that article. It's just accepted. So we're really making as much effort as possible to show that we're going to work alongside those communities. But it is something that's ongoing. And if this isn't adhered to, I would argue in an ice-diminished Arctic, with increased vessel traffic, not only from research, there's a lot of potential for conflict. And the only way to mitigate that conflict is through trust and ongoing productive relationship working in that regard. I don't know if, sorry, you want to add to that?
I could add. So the U.S. Coast Guard is also very sensitive to the communities in the Arctic. I mean, Admiral McAllister mentioned the reindeer. It was Mike Healy, he's out there caring, making sure the natives had something to eat. One thing we're doing is that there are vessels, foreign vessels, going up into the Arctic to do research. So how do we mitigate their actions and how they're going to affect the native hunts? So what we've done, I put together a list of all the vessels going to the Arctic each year, and I send it to the, and this just started last year, send it to the Alaskan Eskimo Whaling Commission lawyer, and then they know what's going on in their backyard. Yeah, so, Japan's coming this year, Korea, Canada, China, they're all going to be in the Arctic. Sikuliak's going to be there, but there's going to be other vessels, and we need to keep them in mind when we talk about community interaction in the whaling and things like that. Just as an example, off Point Hope, there were 10 ships this year doing a transect off Point Hope, 10 research vessels, and they got within a mile of Point Hope. We need to give Point Hope a heads up, and hopefully through this communication with the AEWC, we did.
Yeah, Jim, over to you. But just real quick, is there a slide that shows the ship count on there? I know that's a really good-looking guy up on the screen, but there was one that had, right there, yeah. So that shows you all the ships. Thanks. It's a much better picture. And Jim wanted to finish. I think you want to make a comment here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that is a fantastic question. That is a lot of stuff going on we really need to know about and talk about. How many people in this room have heard the term traditional knowledge? Okay, good. The last time I asked that question, it was like one or two folks, and I had to say that was absolutely appalling. In the work that we do funding research, over the years, we have gotten the oil and gas industry to really work hard with the native villages to tell people where they are at. Over the last couple of years, we have found that some of the biggest offenders of going out and impacting or potentially impacting subsistence activities were the researchers. And I can remember very distinctly a couple of years ago, one of the projects we were funding through a university was going to go up and pull out a mooring, a long-term mooring, right in the middle of whaling season. That is a non-starter. That did not occur. If you're going to work in the Arctic, boots on the ground, you need to be familiar with things like the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission that Dave just mentioned, the Walrus Commission, the Inupiat communities of the Arctic Slope, the presidents of each of the native villages. And you need to get up there in advance. If you're a researcher and you've got a project and you want to go out there and work in the Beaufort Sea and the Chukchi, just don't go up there and say, we're here. Go up there a year or two before your project starts and talk with the tribes and say, what do you think of my sampling plan? What do you think of when I'm going to survey and where I'm going to survey? If you don't, you will pay dearly. There's an organization that's formed as a result of the communication between the Coast Guard, NOAA, and the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission called the Arctic Waterway Safety Committee. And a lot of time spent at those meetings is trying to figure out who are the researchers coming up here that could potentially disturb our subsistence hunts. This is really, really serious. It's not so much the industry. Now it is the researchers. But going back to the international stuff, and Dave, I'm glad you said that. That reminded me. When Shell was up there in the Chukchi Sea in 2015, they had 27 boats. Now, besides having the Polar Pioneer and the Discoverer, each of those vessels had an indigenous person on there monitoring marine mammals and talking with the communities on where the ships were, who was hunting where at the time, so everybody's coordinated. However, right there when the drilling is going on, you had the Polar Pioneer and the Discoverer separated by about 9 miles. Out of the blue, a big gray boat showed up between the two vessels, and Vladimir was waving. We had a Russian intelligence vessel showed up between the two vessels, and of course I was being asked by some of the villages, well, do they have a marine mammal observer? Are they going to talk to us? So we have to do a lot of work with our colleagues in other countries in the Arctic to make sure they understand that working with indigenous communities around the Arctic Circle is first and foremost. It's their home, it's their garden, and it starts well in advance. Do not take it for granted. They're incredibly smart. They will tell you what they think, among other things. So that was an excellent question. Thank you, Admiral.
1 minute.
1 second. The other thing we do is we have an Alaska Native observer that comes on our vessel, and in fact, in the search and rescue that you participated in, we broke off science and participated as well, as you know. So that was very unfortunate. Those two young gentlemen were not alive when they were recovered, but the fact that we did that search and rescue and a local was on was very part of building the trust.
Thanks. Thanks. And over Juan, I'll be happy to tell somebody how, when you go the other way, how the Navy got $10 million worth of telescopes from NASA because they failed to negotiate and talk to the native people from the island of Hawaii. So, over a wine. Dr. Spanman had his hand up first, Kevin. Go ahead.
So, for example, the NOAA number includes quite a few vessels that are not research vessels, as Captain Bridgman knows. So let's just take that number as close to what the federal research fleet looks like. It's a few dozen ships. And I haven't heard anything about an emerging trend, which I think is going to be particularly important in our considerations, and that's the role of the private sector. I don't mean the folks downstairs. I mean the Paul Allens, the Wendy Schmidts. As Captain Bridgman knows, when you look at ocean exploration, for example, basically a half or a third of the global fleet for ocean exploration is owned and developed by private individuals. We're seeing more and more of that. The question is, how do we as a community, and perhaps if you'd like to venture into how the societies can help, how do we consider the potential role of those private individuals who are bringing literally hundreds of millions of dollars to the table? How do we integrate that with what the federal fleet plans look like? And how do we deal with the, if you will, the volatility of what some people have called the bored billionaires club, of those folks who come in and say, yeah, I'm going to put $100 million down and build a Falcor, for example, or a Nautilus, or what others have done. So how do we take into account that private individual investment?
So I'm going to turn to Captain Bridgman to tackle that one to begin with.
It's a good question. But I think it is, that passion, the impetus there with that crowd, I think it's just building a partnership with them and a continuing dialogue and harnessing that enthusiasm. And I think when they, we know when they get into that business and they bring those resources to the table, it's, in the pursuit of science, trying to help, they have latitude to do things that in the federal and academic fleet we can't. So I think it's just building those partnerships. It's a great question, and it's a great thought. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to grow those partnerships, and they're, they're maybe bored millionaires club, but they're still in it for the same reasons we are. And I think it's just channeling that effort in the right direction.
Rick, if I can comment for just a second, just from a tiny different perspective, dealing with like the offshore oil and gas industry. When Shell was up there were 27 vessels up there. That's the private sector. That's an incredible investment. Scientists reaching out to them on, look, while you're up there, your MODUs, Mobile Ocean Drilling Units, that's what the Polar Pioneer and the DISCO was. They're up there for a short time, they're transversing the ocean. Could they take samples? Could you do some work for us along the way? But we also have to remember they can't be made to do that, but we have to offer them something. And that's something I learned from Harry Brower, the mayor of the North Slope Borough. The most important word in the Arctic is sharing. So if we're going to work with some of these private sectors, the scientist working with them to collect this information has to give something in return. What do they get out of this? And so there's these operations. Just to go one step further, we only have the two icebreakers, but when Shell was up there, they had icebreakers. They just rented them from foreign countries. So that's the kind of stuff we have to sort of keep in mind.
Sure. Brad, you want to make a comment? Anybody else? Dave, Emily?
It's a great question, Rick. I don't have a great answer, that's for sure. But these folks these billionaires are naturally curious. They build a vessel. Paul Allen, I know, contacted a former faculty member at URI, Haraldur Sigurdsson, because he wanted to go and study undersea volcanoes around Iceland. The next thing you know, Haraldur's on his ship for a couple of weeks. So one thing that I don't see and I think might be an opportunity is that to make that bridge between the basic research we do in academia on these UNOLS vessels, et cetera, is education. And I don't think there's a dean in this country who wouldn't love to have Paul Allen as a faculty member, guest faculty member, and create a program of education. I mean, Bob Ballard effectively did that by creating Jason and reaching out to a huge number of young children. And Bob said, never underestimate the value of a smiling child. So he supports, as you know, his operation a lot through an education approach. So I wonder if there might be something there in terms of a value proposition, for lack of a better word, to some of these rich folks that want to understand and explore the ocean, but other than writing a check, they're not educated in this area. And they could have a much greater reach if they supported the research and education aspect particularly. So, but that can be fickle. They're into it now and then maybe not later so much, or to want to do what they want. So it's a big challenge though. You need continuity, as you well know, and reliability of vessel operations. Just a thought.
Thanks, Brad. There's a lot more. That's a great question, and I know one that's being wrestled with, of how do you align better the interest and the impact that is desired by the philanthropic community, which isn't great. The government requirements, which is a requirement-based data gathering for research. And then you've got this scientific, opportunistic type of research and exploration, as you talked about. There's great synergy if you can bring together that interest and impact with the requirements and with the scientific side. And I think that's the challenge. That's one of the challenges of our times as we look forward. Sir. And the expense of the shipbuilding infrastructure, and who's going to pay the bills, the extensive bills for that, and how do we do it? How do we get a much better return on investment on every dollar of shipbuilding? Exactly, sir. Kevin Traver, you had a comment.
Thanks,
hopefully time for one last.
Yeah, we're good. So we talked today a lot about why we're going to ships, why we're going to sea in ships, and there are some new programs out there. I'd like to hear from Emily a little bit about Task Force Ocean and how programs like that can bring together all of us, these diverse federal organizations, us as nonprofits. How do we support those efforts, and our friends downstairs in industry? How do we all support keeping this going to sea in ships? going?
Thanks very much. It's a great question. I'm relatively new to DC, and I'm amazed by how much coordination needs to happen. And I think that's really the biggest challenge. There's a lot of good work happening downstairs in every room with every conversation that's happening today, and it's getting everybody in the same place to work together. Most literally and nuts and bolts wise on Task Force Ocean, for those who don't know, we do have a website. If you Google Navy Task Force Ocean, you'll find it. That's probably the easiest way to get hooked up with what we are doing. When we have a executive steering committee meeting coming up in a week or two that people can join into remotely, hosted at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. But I think going back to the essence of your question, one project that I've had the opportunity to work on this year with Navy and NOAA is looking at the Arctic strategy for each of those organizations as well as the Coast Guard. And it really takes time to sit down and look at what the priorities for each organization are and where we can work together to maximize what we are all putting in and getting out of that. So that was an interesting project that I worked on that is hopefully going to be moving forward through coordination with Navy and NOAA, looking at what our needs are in the Arctic. So mostly thinking about forecasting, weather forecasting, and sea ice forecasting.
Thanks, Emily. One more burning question out in the audience. Once, twice. Then I'm going to ask impromptu for each one of our panelists to wrap up in terms of if you had 1 minute to talk to a major decision maker in Washington, D.C. of why the Federal Oceanographic Fleet was so important. You got 1 minute. Please do that. I'm going to start with your end of the table, Brad, and I love putting people on the spot, as you know. So
Wasn't on the script.
I know. I told you I'd go off.
Can you repeat that again? I have 1 minute to sell the fleet to a heavy in DC?
Absolutely. What's so
Okay.
important?
Just getting over a cold, not thinking so clearly. But I think that, let me just take on icebreakers. We just had a National Academy report.
Yeah.
We need four more icebreakers. Just from a national security point of view, I guess, would be the strongest argument inside the Beltway, probably. And, we are totally undercapitalized with 1.5 icebreakers effectively, compared to many of the other Arctic nations, of course. So going forward with an ice-diminished Arctic, from the national security perspective, it's imperative to make the investments in a expanded and strengthened oceanographic fleet for the benefit of our health and ocean economy.
Very good. Thanks, Brad.
I'm sorry.
No, it still works on me. I'm sorry.
Carrie
Hit
is,
the spot. You're up.
I think I just got a lot of really good firsthand experience and knowledge for why it really matters. There's a lot of information that we can only collect on ships, and there's a lot of information that we don't know about how the ocean operates, and especially the Arctic Ocean. And if we want to continue studying that, if we want to continue to advance our scientific knowledge as well as our knowledge of the undersea domain from a military perspective and a Navy perspective, we have to keep going to sea and we have to keep collecting data because we're not at a point where we can replace ships. We need more of that information.
Yeah, my comments would be along those lines also. The academic students, PhDs, if you look at how many are out there, there's a lot. And what they need, and a lot of them work on, is data to build models on what the oceans do. Well, somebody needs to go to sea to collect those data. And that's what the ships do. And if we have less capability with ships, we're going to have less capability to predict ice, to predict storms, to predict, safety at sea. So we need those ocean observations. we need the ships.
So, we've all heard it. This should be called Planet Ocean, not Planet Earth, right? The ocean is key to how you live on this planet, whether it's in Anchorage, Alaska, or Dallas, Texas. Our recreation, our security, our economy, our way of life is dependent upon this system that has so much influence over us, right down to the air we breathe, up to 50%, some models even higher, of the air we breathe. We have the ocean to thank for that. So I think about it like this: every other breath you take, you have the ocean to thank for that. NOAA's been going to sea in pursuit of data since 1807, the oldest scientific agency in the nation, the Coast Survey, and we'll be going to sea for many years to come. Why? Because the data that we collect is inherently important to our way of life here in America and across the globe. And while technologies augment and make our operations more efficient, they'll never truly supplant the need to have scientists at sea collecting the data in real time.
Okay, well, obviously, first of all, Todd, you stole a lot of my bullets, but that's okay. You're a fellow Aggie. And John, obviously, you've spoken to some of my previous panel victims where I always ask this elevator question on a regular basis.
I've never heard of that.
Well, you've had, well, anyways, I always ask folks at a conference like this, you're in an elevator with a badge, and a soccer mom or a soccer dad with 3 kids gets in the elevator, they see your badge, they don't know what you do or why you do it. All they know is you got paid a lot of money to come to a meeting like this to talk about fun stuff. And they ask you, why is it important to me when I'm trying to make ends meet with 3 jobs between the 2 spouses? First of all, this is a water planet. If you don't understand, and you've touched on this, so I'm going to take one of your bullets back. We're a water planet. Well, why do I care? Irene, Maria, Katrina, Jose, I think that's a pretty good reason. How can you answer the questions if you don't have people out there getting the information to help the next generation? And that's where you hook it in there. We have people coming behind us, and I'm not talking just about the scientists. I'm talking about the little kids running around out there that may never have seen the ocean. I grew up in Ohio, never saw it till I was 18. But I knew it was important. You need to reach out to those kind of folks and tell them, for us to know about the ocean, as you said, John, we have to go out there. It's really important. Just look at the TV. We can see the entire water planet from a satellite, but we only see the surface. What's under the surface?
Thanks, all of you. I think you've made an incredible, good argument of why to know the sea, we must go to sea. We need to know the sea for all the reasons that have been talked about. It's about national security, homeland security, safety, economic security. These issues relate to a larger term I like to refer to as ocean security. Ocean security relies on ocean knowledge. To know the sea, we've got to go to sea. We are doing it differently with new tools and autonomy. We are doing it, we're going to have to do it more and more in partnerships between private, between federal, between industry. But we have a great opportunity to do that going forward, and I encourage you to help us do that. I want to thank the members of the panel, not just for this great panel we've had today, but for their dedication, their leadership, and their innovation. And looking forward, I know that our federal ocean fleet is going to be healthy thanks to the efforts of great individuals like this. So thank you very much. And don't leave. Sit down for one moment, because we're going to close it out. I'm going to ask for Kevin Traver or Charlie Alexander to come here and close out this session, this very important session. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Admiral. I appreciate that. John, we really do thank you for coming all the way up here and doing this for us. We always enjoy hearing from you, Admiral, so thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for joining us today. Way back when, I was really stupid. I took a job. I got congressman elected. You can boo me later. I actually ran 3 congressional campaigns, and I told my congressman 2 things. One, it's about jobs, and it's about education. Those are 2 arguments that we need to put on the table here when we're talking about federal scientific shipbuilding and why it's required. We touched on the education part a little. I'd love to put those three folks up there on the big screen in every classroom in America, and we wouldn't be having this discussion, right? I mean, they would be done. MTS is really excited about this partnership with all these organizations and the IWG-FI. Charlie and I have been working on this for about 6 months. We're getting there. This was our first attempt at an event, and we're really looking forward to a sustainable, long-term discussion on why we need to go to sea in ships. And so we have some ideas. We're going to be rolling those out. If you're an MTS member, if you're not an MTS member, I'm not really worried about it, but come get involved. See me here, reach out to me afterwards. We certainly want to have you involved, and you're going to be hearing more about this and this longer sustained campaign over the next couple months. So thank you very much for coming, and let's go get some wine.